Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Metagame Book Club. It is Game Studies Week 2, and last week we did Games and Gender, and this week what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing Ideologies and Games. And we have with us our facilitator, Sherry Jones, who is going to lead us through quite a discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to her.
Okay, thank you, Kay. So once again, this is week 2 on Ideologies and Games. We will be addressing more controversies this week, so prepare yourself. The first 3, if you guys play games besides WoW, the best game, right?
Actually, I think that we might be able to chime in with either some ideology or at the very least, some popular culture that spills over into the game. That kind of does make you wonder a little bit.
Cool. I'm hoping for those questions and comments. But anyway, first 3 images there. The good old fighter, right? Street Fighter on the top left corner, and on the top right is Assassin's Creed. I think that's 4. And then on the bottom, that's Halo 4. I think that's the newest installment. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and start. So let's begin. Okay, so I know I send a lot of text like I usually do, and I am eager to cover everything, but I can't. So I decided to focus on 3 main texts. And if any of you want to talk about any other text, certainly put in some questions there for me. But the 3 texts we're going to cover is, first one, Rapture through Russell, BioShock and Bertrand Russell's Authority in the Individual by Karen O. Myrtile, and that's written this year. The second one is called Play and Possibility and the Rhetoric of the War on Terror, The Structure of Agency in Halo 2 by Gerard Voorhees. And then that third one is Moral Decision Making and Foul by Marcus Schultzke. And that's in 2009. So we're going to move on to the next slide. Okay, so here are some guiding questions just to help you think about some of the text, because I put maybe about 20 different texts or so, or 25, I think, of different texts. But here are some of the questions that can help you think about all the text. So first of all is, what exactly is ideology according to Louis Althusser? What is the relationship between ideology and digital media, such as video games? The second question is, according to the academic articles I assigned just throughout this entire week, what types of ideology present and assert themselves in games, and can you name some examples? Third question is, do game developers consciously incorporate ideology into a game's narrative? If not, why do ideologies appear in video games? And the last question is, and to all our lovely educators, do you consider video games appropriate for teaching different types of ideology? Why or why not? And I'm generally very curious about this last question. Okay, so those are just to help us think about some of those texts. If you can go next. Okay, so here is the first text we're going to go after is that Rapture through Russell, BioShock and Bertrand Russell's Authority in the Individual by Karen Myrtile. And this shot right here is actually the tea garden in BioShock. And in the previous summer session of our Metagame Book Club, I've already discussed BioShock before, but because the text is so controversial that more academics try to think of different angles to kind of review the text. So here it is. It came back to us. So yeah, I'm gonna go next. Okay, so I'm just giving you guys some context because the text is really rich, okay? So Karen O'Murtile analyzes a breakdown of the city of Rapture. So it's a city inside the game, okay? And the political ideology of individualism in the story of BioShock, made in 2007. Through Bertrand Russell's political philosophy on the role of social cohesion in the survival of a state. For Murtile, previous attempts to analyze Bioshock's story through Ayn Rand's individualism do not adequately account for the complex issues that led to Rapture's series of breakdowns. So if you guys do a quick search on Google and you type Bioshock and philosophy, you'll find tons of articles talking about, oh my gosh, the story in Bioshock really aligns with Ayn Rand's philosophy. But Murtile is saying, well, it's really inadequate to really talk about the complexity of this game. So he decides to use Bertrand Russell's lens to help us understand this particular story. And also he says that the Rapture's breakdowns, okay, so the fall of Rapture, the city of Rapture, are caused by intellectualism, oppression of irrationality, individualist freedom, and lack of social cohesion. So I'll explain those as we go. So we can go next. Okay. Balance between rationality and irrationality. So here's a quick quote from Karen. He says, Andrew Ryan's great city, so he's referring once again to Rapture, okay, shuns moral and emotional barriers in the pursuit of artistic, scientific, and industrial greatness. But as Russell explains repeatedly throughout his lectures, those impulses, which he describes as irrational or emotional, can only be suppressed for so long before a type of coil spring effect occurs and a violent, shocking return to natural equilibrium. In the case of Bioshock, this is a state of emotionality or irrationality occurs, okay? So Karen says, essentially borrowing from Bertrand Russell's idea, Bertrand Russell is going to talk about rationality and irrationality in mind as two dominating forces that are both necessary to the way we think about the world. And he is in the position that when you have pure intellectualism and you deny your emotional aspect or irrationality, because he kind of conflate irrationality with emotionalism, then something's going to give. Eventually, it's going to come back to haunt you. So that's one of the idea that's presented here. Okay. So and also, just as a link to our track 2, actually, when we're talking about the book, because it is actually connected to Carl Jung's thought. Jung also talked about the idea of conscious versus unconscious forces, and for him the two layers, unconscious forces is that irrationality that constantly fight to resurface, and a lot of mythology actually draws from the unconscious realm. And Kay, did you want to say something there?
Oh, no. I was just going to say, we haven't done that chapter, and it wasn't a chapter I was going to assign out of The Power of Myth, but that's okay because I think people should read the whole book. You know, The Power of Myth, it's an easy read, but the chapter that it would correspond with really well would be the Inner Journey chapter.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying that. So just to show you guys the relationship, irrationality is not this negative connotation towards it, but it's a realm that's not dominated by pure calculation, pure math, pure calculation, pure logic. So it's just two realms that we need for the mind to function. Okay, so next. Okay, so next thing is the society versus individualist freedom. So Karen tells us, Ryan, in building Rapture, built an escape from the impulses which he felt restricted growth in the facets of human development important to him. But in doing this, he forced other elements of natural human instinct in society to be quashed in the spirit of individualist freedom. So I did forget to kind of explain the backstory of Bioshock, but essentially Andrew Ryan is an industrialist, and he did not like the oppression of the government, and I believe it was set in the 1940s. So he decided to corral a community of wealthy people and said, you know, we're going to build an underground city under the ocean, and we will be free from government control and manipulation. We will build our own civilization underwater. So that's what they're talking about. And he calls that underwater city Rapture. Okay. And obviously, there's going to be some biblical implication with the word rapture.
Yeah, I think so.
That's intentional. But yeah, it's an escape So Karen said it's a built-in escape from the impulses, which is the emotion. He says logic and intellectualism for Ryan basically is the way to progress. Okay, anything else beyond that is anti-progress, so we should abandon all of that. Okay, so that's what Murtile is really saying here. So if we can go next. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about this Dr. Tenenbaum, which is also a key character in the story. So Tenenbaum, intellectualism, and amorality. The character of Tenenbaum, who worked with kindred spirits and Nazi experiments during the Second World War, is seemingly a perfect match with the amoral, intellectual, progress-driven ethic of Ryan in Rapture, and yet it is her story which shows a dramatic change. So just to clarify this, and she is a doctor, and I'll explain in just a sec, but she is also a key character in the story. But when we say, especially in philosophy, when we say amoral, a means not, and also it's just none. So essentially, amoral is not, it's not moral, it's not anti-moral, it's not, unmoral. It's just not, no morals. Okay.
Yeah, and that's what. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
What I was gonna say is what I saw, at least with a lot of the reading this time, and this is a real question for me. How, and you're going to get into this, but where popular culture seems to be coming into these games, and I'm just wondering about the game designers, if they're making choices more on what they've been seeing in popular culture, because this statement that you just said. If anyone out there is watching the series that just started, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and if anybody is, let me know. But Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. just started, and one of the scientists who go and work for the group, the evil group, Hydra, what she basically said when they pulled her in to ask her about her loyalties, and she was an undercover agent, but her loyalties, she didn't say that she believed in the organization. What she said was, before, S.H.I.E.L.D. had the best science and had the money to do the best experiments and to push science and to make science go forward, and that S.H.I.E.L.D. no longer was able to do that. So now she came to the other organization, and her loyalty was to wherever the science was. It wasn't, are you the good guys or the bad guys? It was, I'm going where the science is. And that really reminded me of it, a trope we're seeing in popular culture.
Perfect parallel. Yeah, that's often surfaces in science fiction. This tale, a warning against science, the science dominating your thing, because we always kind of equate, at least in popular culture, right, from science fiction, and also your example there, that we equate coldness, intellectualism, and amorality in the same line with scientific thinking. And certainly this game is kind of taking advantage of that trope as well. So she is a very important character, and they align her with the Nazi experiment, so you can see what kind of character we're setting up. So I'm sorry, go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so now comes Bertrand Russell. And I kind of want to give you guys more context because, again, I know it's throwing a lot of concepts here, but I want to clarify a particular argument by Murtile that Bridget Tenenbaum, okay, she's the doctor there, symbolizes the story's turn from amoral intellectualism to emotionalism, and this emotionalism in the story was repressed by rationality, okay? So the more rational you are, the less space you have for emotionalism, according to this game formula, okay? So here's some context on this Tenenbaum. So Bridget Tenenbaum is a geneticist who discovered the atom substance in sea slugs. Again, biblical reference, okay? And creates a series of atom-based commercial products for enhancing human capabilities. Now, I couldn't squeeze all that in there, but exactly what the sea slugs do is that they have some stem cells in them, And essentially, when you inject sea slug, with a needle, you inject it into your arm. It replaces it. It destroys your cells and replace it with new cells that generate things that capabilities that humans otherwise would not have. Like, for example, we can now shoot fire out of our hands after you. Yeah. So enhancing human capabilities. She also created little sisters. So what they did was they kidnapped, or actually I shouldn't say kidnap, but they asked all the wealthy families to donate their female children to collect Adam because their body is necessary to cultivate bigger sea slugs. Okay, so the following are two in-game audio diary recordings by Bridget Tenenbaum. So someone actually pulled the audio from the game, and I'm just going to give you the transcript, but the link will be available in the slides if you would like to listen to them. Okay, so next. Okay, here's audio diary 1. She says, the augmentation procedure is a success. The slugs alone could not provide enough Adam for serious work, but combined with the host, now we have something. The slug is embedded in the lining of the host's stomach, and after the host feeds, we induce regurgitation. And then we have 20, 30 times yield of usable Adam. The problem now is the shortage of hosts. Fontaine says, and Fontaine is a co-owner, co-founder of Rapture. Okay, so Fontaine says, patience, Tenenbaum. Soon the first home for little sisters will be open, and that problem will be solved. So one thing is, this is just kind of showing you the kind of evil work that Tenenbaum is doing in the name of progress, right? Because they say human enhancement. So who cares if we're using little girls? We can use their body as hosts for these sea slug to go into, and we can make a whole bunch of more of this Adam for people to feed. Okay, so that's first one. If we can go to the next. So the next part, this is the second diary. So she says, and this is actually, the picture you see in front of you is also another shot, which is actually, they're trying to mimic that 40s look with the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. She says, what makes something like me? I look at genes all day long, and never do I see the blueprint of sin. I could blame the Germans, but in truth, I did not find tormentors in the prison camp. She's talking about, Nazis. But spirits, these children I brutalized have awoken something inside that for most is beautiful and natural, but in me is an abomination, my maternal instinct. So, as a woman, when she says it's an abomination, to have a sense of maternal instinct toward the children, it's only an abomination under the ethics, right? Under the ethics or ethos of Rapture, okay? But because of the idea that in the name of progress, nothing should be in the way of progress. Progress in itself is a good thing, is the right thing to do to build up Rapture. So for her to have these feelings, and she started to feel remorse later. She said, what am I doing here? I'm starting to feel for these children. This is what Murtaugh is saying, is that there's a term from cold rationality, intellectualism, all the way to emotionalism. And she was the character that most exemplified this turn in the game. Okay. So, next. Okay. So here's another, here's where he clarifies Tenenbaum's emotionalism. So he says, yet her constant repression of her emotional core leads to the coiled spring effect, and later the player discovers Tenenbaum's true feelings. I feel hatred, like I never felt before, in my chest, bitter, burning fury. I can barely breathe, and suddenly I know it is not this child I hate. Bioshock presents her turn from being the intellectual, progress-driven being of rationality to becoming a mother, a creature of emotion, a spiritual connection, as an about-face. Now, this thing about the swing where Bertrand Russell says, if you repress irrationality long enough, it would just burst, eventually it will break out. And when you go to one extreme, what the Taoists, and I'm just bringing in the Taoists now, Chinese Taoists would say, when you go to one extreme, the opposite will occur, right? So when you feel nothing for a very long time, the fact that all of a sudden she feels hatred toward what she is doing, it would be what they say is that repressed feeling coming out. Okay, and one clarification too. When there's also some bit of sexism in philosophy. So when we say emotionalism and somehow you associate with femaleness, please understand through Carl Jung's lens that every single person, okay, has masculine and feminine qualities. So it's not as if only women have emotion and men do not. I mean, that's an oversimplification of the issue. Okay. So next. All right. So there's another character, or actually three characters, the Lutzes. They're a family in this game, okay? And they're symbolic because they died due to this cold intellectualism. So here's another quote. So BioShock, in keeping with his theme of mind overriding heart, offer Mariska Lutz's story as another example of the suppression of irrationality, which, while giving Rapture life, turns against the underwater refuge. Mariska's daughter Masha is taken in for implantation to further the scientific uses of the sea slug to save the city, according to one of her audio logs. Mariska is expected to, and indeed does, suppress her instincts and her emotional drives in favor of Rapture's ethos. For the good of the dream of rapture in science, Mariska and her husband make a sacrifice ultimately neither can live with. So they ended up giving up their daughter, Masha, to Rapture. They said, okay, go ahead and use my kid for the experiment. And at the end, the main character, when you play through the game as the main character, you will discover their corpse. And this is how you got hold of their audio. When they say that I regret doing this, even though I know that builds the ethos of Rapture. And by the way, just so I can ad-lib, as I ad-lib all the time, ethos and ethics, not the same thing. So ethos, okay, in rhetorical terms means the character of something. Some people say, from Aristotelian thought, is the credibility of somebody. Okay, my credibility is my ethos, right? So what kind of ethos do I have? But also, your credibility as a person is associated with your character. How do you present yourself? How do you conduct yourself? So Rapture's ethos means how Rapture would like to conduct itself. And it says we want progress. So that's the character of Rapture. Okay? So I think I can go next there. Okay. More on community ideology versus individual interests, and I might just look at those yellow highlighted parts. It says, the conflict between building a community and allowing complete individualism is what ultimately causes the first cracks to occur. And actually the middle part's important too. So as Russell would put it, both Ryan and other people in Rapture are creating a product, a paradise, okay, paradise of individualism and excellence. However, the divorce between management and the worker, that is, top level and the lowest level, means that the product becomes less and less of interest to those who don't share the vision of the management. The uniting purpose, the social bond so crucial to the development of a stable society, are denied a chance to grow. Rapture, in the end, remains an empty seashell rather than a city. So, for Russell, in order for a society to bond, the member of the society to bond, right, there has to be some kind of uniting purpose. And when that uniting purpose is not there, social cohesion breaks down, okay? And one of the way it does is when the worker, or basically the citizens, okay, versus state. You can look at that analogy. Management, the worker, state versus the individual. When the state wants one thing and this is their ethos, and the individuals say, well, my interest is this, there is a split and a fissure. And Kay, did you want to add to this?
Oh, no. I was just agreeing with it. No, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. I was looking for marketing parallels, but...
Oh, well, I could definitely talk about that. I mean, come on, that's what propagandists are for. That's what lobbyists are for. Campaign managers. I mean, come on, the press secretary. I mean that's, we have formed things in our society to help change the individual's idea or experience without without having to force it on them.
Right, right.
It's kind of,
Slow. Oh, go ahead, Rick.
I'm sorry, it seems like an extreme. You know, the idea of sacrifice for the good of the society is a good thing, right? But these stories sort of take it to the extreme where the sacrifice is, you know, extreme, too much, unacceptable. But of course, we're always making sacrifices for the good of society in a way. Am I right?
Right.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, they put it on top of its head. I mean, taking young girls rather than young men. But I mean, in the U.S., the draft, the U.S. military draft, while it is not in place now, every male student who turns 18 who wants to apply for federal student aid does have to. There is a box that student has to check before their FAFSA or federal aid package is looked at. It's a requirement. Have you registered? All you have to do is click the, like circle this little box and take care of this little form, but it's still there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I bring in Carl Jung simply because there's that connection with the power of myth, and it's okay if you guys haven't read those particular chapters, that's fine.
No, it's
But
okay.
there's a lot of connection with psychology there, and going back to what Grit is saying, right? So for Freud, he would say that as the moment you're born, essentially you're in a society, because society it means just more than one person. So unless you're born in the wild and there's no one conceiving you, and no one giving birth to you, you are born in the society whether you like it or not. And also for Freud, right, and Freud also the connection there is that Freud is teacher to Carl Jung, okay, and Carl Jung, later on. Okay, so there's all these connections. But Freud also says that as long as you're in society, you are contributing to society. Okay, whatever you do, you are contributing. Now, this contribution could be to the extreme of self-sacrifice, right? So, case example where you're going to the military. I mean, that's a form of self-sacrifice, but essentially you are serving the greater good of society. Now, this particular story, BioShock, we might say, boy, this game is taking to the extreme. There could be practical reasons just because the player gets to shoot because it's a shooter.
Yeah.
So extreme evils, extreme monsters, you get to shoot the enemy, right? But on the other side, the philosophical end, in order to understand these hypothetical scenarios where we can say, well, if all these parameters are set exactly like this and the conditions are this way, here are the consequences if we don't watch ourselves, if we let society go down this path. So I think that BioShock does a good job, even if it's not intentionally doing this, showing us certain consequences of this pursuit of pure intellectualism and pure individualism. Okay? So great comments there. If we can go next. Okay. There's another way, and Murtaugh, this is very interesting, and this might be controversial, so I'm curious of what you guys think here. Everything's So, no enemy says uniting purpose. So here she says, a glance at Rapture and its founding ethos shows that Ryan almost accidentally made this togetherness impossible, so people getting together, okay? Rapture was built underwater, away from the man in Washington, etc., because it was the only place that Rapture would be allowed to exist. It was the only place where those who felt restricted by societal norms and values could escape and be free. So Rapture, in short, no longer has any enemies. But for Russell, and he's going to, basically through Russell's lens, you can see also the problem is, usually if you have an enemy in sight, a community, unfortunately, that's the best way to unite a community, to say, okay, we have to fight, we have to, unite and fight this shared enemy. But because Rapture is essentially away from other civilization, they go, here's our ideals, here's our rules, no one will interfere, no one can come in and attack us. They basically took all the enemies away, so that's also another part that put a ding to the armor of rapture, because it's basically saying that's another way why they don't have any social cohesion. Okay? So I think we can go next. All right. So again, please, please, please read those texts. I can't cover the entire richness of the articles because I have to stop myself at some point. So
yeah.
So the articles, just trust me, I didn't cover all of it, but those are some of the key points that are very interesting to discuss. So here's the next one. It's called Play and Possibility in the Rhetoric of the War on Terror, The Structure of Agency in Halo 2 by Gerard Voorhees. Now, again, you can see the keywords there. The War on Terror. So we're going to get into some heavy stuff, okay? So I think, and also the screenshot is actually Master Chief. So he is the character you play as through the entire series of Halo, okay? And that's him and during war. So we can go next. All right. So here's some context to help you understand this article. So on player agency in interpreting the rhetoric of war in Halo 2. So Gerald Voorhees, and this article is written in 2014, examines the ideology of American exceptionalism in the game Halo 2 through the lens of post-9/11 rhetoric on the war on terror. He argues that the game affords the player a sense of agency to respond to the war on terror via gameplay. Okay. Voorhees applies Michel Foucault's theory of agency and Northrop Frye's theories of fictional mode and thematic genre to consider a range of possible, potentially overlapping affective responses to Halo 2. So I think for my slides, my purpose of my slides, because this article is really complex and wonderful, I really can only cover his application of Foucault's theory of power an individual, okay? So if we can go next. All right, so now we're going to talk about this, which I find fascinating because there's lots of research on this. There is a very close-knit relationship between the government and the entertainment media industry, and I think most of us get an inkling of this, but when we say entertainment media, it obviously also includes the video game industry. Okay, so he brought in Stahl's research from 2006, and he says, Stahl provides a most comprehensive analysis of the game industry's role in the post-9/11 media landscape, recounting the Bush administration's efforts to reach out to entertainment media industries. Stahl gives a thoroughly contextualized accounting of numerous games released in the 5 years following the attacks at the World Trade Center, and argues that the game discourses blend the distinction between citizen and soldier. So Stahl thinks that some of the games, particularly that 5 years right after 9/11, those games start to turn citizen into soldier in that it prepares our mentality to be soldiers in that sense. Okay, so next. Okay, now I'm going to kind of touch, and I will not be able to do a really awesome job for Foucault because Foucault's philosophy is also pretty complicated. But here's a brief definition that Voorhees offer for us on Foucault's definition of power. Okay, so power is an effect of knowledge materialized through the actions of subjects. So again, power and knowledge. Okay, so power is not blunt strength, but a type of knowledge. Power operates to the extent that the actions make sense in the context of the discourses that shape how people know the matter in question. So in the sense that power comes from what you know in order to join discourses, conversations about a specific topic. This does not mean that power is domination, according to Foucault. So it's not exactly to dominate others. Quite the opposite. And here's what Foucault says. Power operates on the field of possibilities in which the behavior of active subjects is able to inscribe itself. So inscribe itself meaning that in a sense of identity, so we go back to the identity talk again. But to inscribe myself, to identify myself as a certain person, that is power because I have certain knowledge to make myself as such. So when we say I am a teacher, there's certain things I have to know to be a teacher, right? Or I am a marketer. There are certain things you have to know. So that knowledge in that sense is a type, power is a type of knowledge, okay? So next. Okay. Now here's the second definition of agency. So we want to separate that out. So when we talk about game studies or game-based learning or video games, agency has a bit of a different definition there. So here's Foucault's definition of agency. So Voorhees says, this paradigm, cognizant of the ubiquity of power and the importance of intelligible action, maintains that agency, quote, must merge or emerge from an analysis of the particular concept that enables specific modes of being, responsibility and effectivity. Agency in this light is neither the freedom from domination, characteristic of liberalism, nor the power to impact the game world, banalized by scholars of game design, but the ability to create meaning in a situation not of one's own making. So, in that sense, what are we saying here? The yellow part is in focus, okay? So, agency in the sense that when we're playing a video game, okay, we are interpreting meaning from the video game. You can, and there's other parts. Voorhees discusses the fact that there were players who played Halo 2 and thought that it must be talking about 9/11. It's an allegory to 9/11. While others say, well, look, it's not really promoting U.S. war on terror. It's really a critique of the war on terror. So there's like a range of different interpretations of what exactly the video game's saying. But in that sense, that the fact that we have different opinions of what a game is saying is a type of agency, which Foucault is basically saying the ability to create meaning in a situation not of one's own making. So I can't control the situation, but I certainly can control my interpretation of the meaning of that situation. Okay? I hope, did that help?
I think it did, and it is making me think about a DARPA's contest that happens once a year, and that includes simulations. And also, the thing about it is after 9/11, if you're talking about agency in the sense that people have options and feel like they have the ability, well, you have ability to create meaning. I'd also go with the ability to do something, anything. And I think that that's a lot of what these types of games provide us. Because when the Twin Towers went down, I mean, the hours that everyone was watching, I was at the University of Nebraska then, and just one of the admin assistants kind of went by my office and said, I don't know what's going on. And I was listening to NPR, and I mean, just the whole, everyone on our floor then gathered in the room that had the TV and just kept watching it like for hours as everything was unfolding, and no one knew what was going on. And because I had some friends in NYC, I immediately called them. We canceled classes. We canceled meetings that we had. We told everybody to go, go home and check on their loved ones, and if they had any family members or friends who were traveling. I mean, we didn't know what was going on and what to do that day.
It's that loss, and it's that loss of control, right? The suddenness of it. In that loss of control, we all of a sudden don't realize we can do something, or it's almost as if we have nothing to do but to kind of wait it out and see exactly what's happening.
Because the Twin Towers, from higher ed, if you were touring, if you had your students in New York City going to a conference or anything else, Twin Towers was a place that it was likely you would stop at.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty rough. That was a big event, and so going, and I told you guys we're talking about some pretty controversial, heavy topics today. But just to clarify on what exactly is the difference between the sense of agency compared to agency and game design. So in game design, when you say, I want to give player's agency. It's about how designers make certain options or choices in the game so that the player will get a sense of agency in that, okay, I can make choices when I'm playing a game. But this is very different from what Foucault is saying or what Voorhees is using through Foucault, is that agency is being able to interpret meaning in a different way, and that, in a sense, is also agency. Okay? Whether or not the game designed any choices at all, we still have agency. Okay? So I think we can go next. All right. So now actually talking about the rhetoric of agency from the War of Terror. Okay, so here's a couple quotes. In the face of this danger, an undeconstructed notion of agency becomes a key theme in official discourses, alternately celebrating and justifying the War on Terror. Agency to seek justice, to redress wrongs, and to define our times, not be defined by them, is central to this ethos. And that was said by George W. Bush. That was quoted. So the same polarizing rhetoric of us versus them that highlights the ideological character of the War on Terror figures American agency as a biblical power wielded against the forces of evil, right? And I think we all remember the whole axis of evil, right?
Yeah.
Because the word, yeah. Yeah, the word evil, you know, just like we just talked about Bioshock. I mean, if you use the word rapture and Adam, you know, there's also these biblical connotation. Same thing with intentionally saying, oh, referring to countries as axis of evil. The word evil usually is in under Christian context. There are some religions that don't have this concept of evil. Okay, so it's a little bit different. But in the sense, he's basically preparing us to understand, first of all, what exactly was going on, what exactly is the rhetoric or the argument, right, or the type of persuasive language coming out of the camp of the War on Terror. And Voorhees will use this as a parallel to understand what Halo 2 is doing. Okay, so I think we can go next. All right, so now, yay, back to exceptionalism. So here is his little quote on that. So ideology of American exceptionalism was a cornerstone of the Bush administration post-9/11 rhetoric and inspired the bravado that underwrote Bush's claim that in our brief and anger we have found our mission and our moment. Indeed, as evidenced by claims that the War on Terror would bring about the democratic globalism espoused by conservative commentators at the American Enterprise Institute and produce what the national security policy of the USA describes as a balance of power that favors human freedom. The War on Terror is deeply entrenched in exceptionalist ideology. This idea that we're special. So in that sense, that's also ideology. And I don't know if I actually explained what ideology is, right?
No, you haven't. You gave us the other definition. Please give us this, because I'd love to compare that to popular culture.
Right.
What popular culture is.
Right. We often associate, I think, I would say popular culture. I don't want to say we as including myself, but popular culture kind of associate a negative connotation with word ideology simply because, you know, there's political ideology and most people kind of jump to that sense in terms of manipulation. But ideology just refers to a system of values, a system of ideas that formulate the way you think about the world. So if you are a thinking being and you function in society, you already have ideology in your head. It's just it's a system of values. So when someone says, here's my ideology, they're only talking about one type of ideology, right? You can have ethical ideology, you can have political ideology, you can have cultural ideology. Ideology just means system of value. It doesn't have anything negative inherent in the term itself. So to think, oh, it's a negative thing, or to say, oh, we don't want to talk about ideology, is a truly misunderstanding that it just means a system of value that help you understand, or a framework, if you will, framework of ideas to help you operate in the world. Okay, so now in Voorhees' term, he's only talking specifically a specific type, which is the ideology of American exceptionalism. So what he's saying there is that there are certain values associated with what exactly is exceptional, what exactly does it mean to be American type exceptional, and there's a whole bunch of values there that forms that type of ideology. Okay, so I hope that makes more sense, and I'm sorry it took me a while to get to that. But let's go next. Okay, so now, yay, we're going to talk about weapon of mass destruction in Halo. Okay, so in Halo, combat evolved, and that's Halo 1. That's the title of Halo 1. Players enter the 26th century, where humans have been attacked without warning, just like the Americans in the World Trade Center on the day of 9/11, and thus find themselves embroiled in a war with an alien civilization known as a Covenant. HCE, which is again short for Halo Combat Evolved, begins with a human spaceship pursued by a Covenant armada, makes a blind jump into deep space and discovers a halo, an ancient but technologically sophisticated relic of the hitherto known Forerunners. So whoever that came before, they call them Forerunners. Upon learning that the Covenant seek to use the halo as a weapon of mass destruction, the player sets out to commandeer or destroy. So your character, your goal, the hero, is to destroy Halo. Okay, so, and again, Halo is, you know, if you really think of Halo as an allegory, right, to 9/11 and our war on terror due to 9/11, right, then you can certainly see that Halo itself, the weapon, could be seen as that equivalent of the weapon of mass destruction that the Bush administration have been saying for a while. Okay? Yeah, an axis of evil. If we can go next. Okay. So now we're talking about Halo 2. So that was what I explained was starting from Halo 1, okay? Because the story, the series actually is a continuous story it builds on, so there's no gap in the way the story's told. So now there's a connection between Halo 2 and theology. So he says, in H2, the Covenant is identified as a religious movement, while dialogue concerning the sacred rings, holy rings, and sacred journey pepper the game's script. The theocratic nature of the Covenant is also highlighted by several non-interactive cutscenes toward the start of the game. One scene is a trial that takes place on the Covenant holy city, holy charity, identified in an establishing shot. So I broke this into two parts because this is pretty big, but I'm going to tell you the story and you'll see why there's parallels. Okay, so next. Thank you. So here's theopolitics, which is a combination of theology and politics. Okay, a Covenant soldier of the Sankheli species, called elites by human soldiers, is publicly humiliated for failing to safeguard the Halo ring destroyed in the first Halo. He is dragged from a kangaroo court to an amphitheater where thousands watch and approbated. There can be no greater heresy. Let him be an example for all who would break our covenant. Then he is tortured and branded with a hot iron. Because this scene takes place before gameplay has begun, it frames the conflict that follows. So when we say framing, you know, in the academic sense, which is if we play a game and there's this beautiful, you know, cutscene or intro scene, basically we don't know what the game is about, so the narrative kind of gives us a framing or ideology. If you want to think of the frame as ideology, you know, a bunch of ideas that collect that system of value to say, okay, this is what kind of game this is. This is how I'm going to engage in this game. Okay? So continuing with the yellow part there, the scene also evokes the fundamentalist ideology of the Covenant and the theopolitical character of the human Covenant war, paralleling the Bush administration's construction of America's war on terror. So you can see how this interpretation, you know, the one with the torture, everything is in there. And Voorhees just kind of do those parallels. And if you guys have questions, feel free to toss it at me, okay? If there's no questions, I'm going to go next. Okay. Now, really quickly here, here's also the rhetoric of the apocalypse. So I think I'm going to just jump really quick at the bottom part because it's a big text. But Voorhees basically says, by linking the Covenant's misguided religious fundamentalism with the potential destruction of all life in the galaxy, the game buttresses the analogical relationship with the war on terror that players must negotiate as they play H2, Halo 2. So there is this idea that if you don't do something, the apocalypse is coming. That's what they mean by the rhetoric of apocalypse. And Please go ahead. Do you want to say something there?
We see that all the time. That is so typical in all the, and I should say in all the MMOs. It's very typical that unless you help out, you the hero, that then the apocalypse is coming, or the end of the world, or
Right. Right. Well, it certainly get you to act, right? Because the fear of impending doom. Yeah, and the fear of impending doom. Oh my God, it's coming, right? And once again, just to clarify, because I know when we encounter a lot of these concepts, it's hard to keep track of what I'm talking about. But just when I say the rhetoric of apocalypse, because rhetoric is essentially persuasive speech, and you use all kind of medium to make it persuasive. So the rhetoric of apocalypse means that if you talk about the apocalypse or frame a problem in terms of, oh my gosh, if you don't do this, something's going to come, then you persuade, your rhetoric persuade someone to act upon that impulse, saying, okay, I must safeguard myself, or I must act to stop the apocalypse. And that's, in philosophy, it's called apocalypticism. So there's another study all about people who say, oh, the apocalypse and how it's going to happen. Okay, so I think we can go next. All right. So that was done, and again, Voorhees, there was a lot more richness to it. I can only talk about so much. We're going to talk about this next text, third text, and the final text, Moral Decision Making and Fallout by Marcus Schulzke. This was written in 2009. And this particular text is pretty wonderful, and I mean, it's very clearly written on how morality or moral choices are built into the Fallout game series. Okay, so he's going to talk about all three Fallout in this article. And what you see there in the images, these are actually from the game. It's actually game cutscenes where basically these are videos made by the government to tell the citizen, no worry, the nuclear war happens, you will be safe, right? So you see that family. Yeah. It's not an actual atomic blast, but the poor family guy, oh my gosh, what should we do? So then the left side, where you have this guy doing the thumb, okay, that's the boy from Fallout, the Fallout boy. He is saying, look, no worries. We have these underground bunkers, and if you guys are down here, you can dance and sing. Nothing will happen. The world is at peace. So talking about propaganda, because you led into that discussion already, okay? And then here's propaganda. Okay, so I think we can move on and actually go into the text. Okay, so here's my little context for this particular text, the Fallout game series and morality. So Marcus Schulzke argues that video games are literary texts that can be used to teach students how to think about morality and moral choices. Now, he and I obviously agree with that because I've been doing this for years in my own classrooms. I always thought that was high form of literature. And he also says, due to the unique interactive nature of video games, he asserts that video games force a player to make moral choices based on their own value systems, which in turn can make the player question her moral choices. And I have made similar argument, well, in the sense that when we say interactive, right, and there's obviously some people who fight against this idea that only video games are interactive, but interactive in the sense of physical interactivity, okay? Because some people argue, literary critics say, well, when you're reading a book, you're thinking about it, so that's interactivity. But in terms of video games, what we're saying is that if your thumbs and your mind is not thinking and moving at the same time, you can't progress in the game. And the fact that you have to make a series of right decisions to progress in the game forces you to be really engaged with the text. Whereas in a book, if you're not, many of us do this. We read a book and maybe we didn't quite understand that concept, but we go, yeah, maybe I'll go back later. Or, okay, maybe I assume this is what it means. And we kind of just doze off and go to the next section. Yeah. In a video game, I think you're going to speak on this, Kay. In a video game, if you don't know what you're doing, I don't think you can progress in the levels. And I know that, for example,
you can, but your motor memory, your motor skills must be so memorized to do that same thing over and over and over again. But yeah, if you're talking about leveling, getting through quests, when you're in a video game and things are getting progressively harder, you're not not going to be able to go on autopilot or do it when you're really tired. And what we see in video games a lot about that is reaction time. There is a big difference when you're playing something when you're tired and when you're not tired, especially if it's new content.
Mm. Very good, because your brain had to flex. There's a logic, right? There's a logic to the content of video games, so you have to figure out how am I going to pass it. Whereas if the game is really familiar, like for example, I think I can play Super Mario Brothers, the good old Super Mario Brothers, without really thinking much because I'm so familiar with the platforming, like where do you hit and where's the secret. I don't really need to think about it. So there's less interactivity there in terms of my motor skills, right? Sensory motor skills. But I don't have to think as much in correlation with my hands. But yeah, there's still interactivity though, in both sides. Now, just to say a little more there, and I forgot to read this little part. So Shulsky says that the Fallout game series is best simulate the conditions of philosophical questions such as moral dilemma in the game narrative and gameplay. So moral dilemma is the idea. This is the idea, which is you have choices. You have two options, or maybe three, but let's say two, okay, for the dilemma. You have two options. Both of the options are the morally correct thing to do, but you get to only make one option, or choose one option. And you know that if you choose that one option, the other option, there are negative consequences to it, but there's nothing you can do. You have to choose one. That's what we mean by moral dilemma, okay? So I think we have a question. And Grid asked us, in these studies on games, how involved were game designers or interviews with game designers? We can draw parallels, but do the designers plan it that way? Do you want to address that, Kay?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing of it is, on these studies, I don't think they were very involved with the game designers whatsoever. I think they're looking at it after the fact, and that's why I keep talking about popular culture. How many of these things are just seeping in there because and I would say lots of sayings that NPC characters say that relate back to and I mean I know in our guild we're fans of the canceled series Firefly, and we all get really happy whenever we happen upon an NPC character who says a quote from the game. But all of this is just seems to be seeping into the writing, and quite honestly, the game writers and the story developers for it, I don't think they go very hard into it. I think what they do is an environmental or a marketing scan of what would be popular, what would sell well, what will they'll look at their demographic and decide what would make their demographic happy, and they usually make decisions on that. Now, indie game designers are very different. But I'm talking about the major corporate game designers. They are doing this with a business plan. They're doing it with focus groups. They are, they might come out with the next, best, greatest like Apple does, but a lot of them aren't. I mean, that's why in so many MMOs we're seeing the same, you'll hear the phrases sword and board. And the gameplay, you'll hear tank and spank because people like it. But I think it's really in the indie games that you can go ahead and see this. And I'd also say that when it comes to like Minecraft and Notch, it'll be interesting to see what he comes up with next. And again, you have to think about who's corporate, who's coming from the view of an artist and they want to make a beautifully played game, and I think a lot of it comes from that.
I agree with you. I think very well stated. I think, first of all, there's several ways to approach the question, because the question is pretty complex, right? Did they intentionally do this, or did they just kind of make some of this up? Yeah. First of all, if any of this, I mean, most of us, if you're not a game designer and you write any kind of paper at all, you are not constantly, it's impossible to consult with someone or somebody of your target audience constantly. Okay, what am I going to write? What's my next line? And so forth. So many of those ideas, how do they get incorporated? I think one of the ways to approach that is to talk about cultural consciousness, which we kind of discussed in the last week lecture. Culture consciousness is, within culture is a way of life, the way you live. And culture consciousness has to do with the type of culture you're in, type of society that you live in, and how people act. So if you, for example, and thanks to the proliferation of mass media, we are able to get different kind of way of life, and we learn about other way of life through television, right? Through podcasts now. I mean, we get all this kind of information. So a writer or a game designer pull from their cultural consciousness, their system of values or ideology, okay, of things that they know from popular culture. And most of it's popular culture, unless they're working with an academic, right? Most of it is, okay, something from popular culture, or, for example, the tropes that we just discussed, reading regarding, the evil scientist, right? The evil scientist, amoral scientist, that's also a trope. And put it into the game. Now, not to dismiss, though, there are some game design companies, especially AAA developers, are able to hire consultants to say, okay, is this historically accurate? I also assigned an article this week about Assassin's Creed, the wonderful realism in that game, because they try to study the history. They talk about red coats, they talk about the Russians and history, and they try to make that realism in the game. And that's pretty intentional. But the other stuff, which is like the trope, would you say everyone's conscious of it? I'm not sure you can say that, because we can automatic association. So we associate certain things because it's already in our cultural consciousness, in our memory. So there's many elements address why ideology falls into these games.
And
okay?
Tanya's question.
Go ahead.
Tanya's question really has. I think it does make a difference for us as educators, and if we want to consider either having our students design games or if we're designing games ourselves, is that if we look and we see that there's no game out there, whether it's classified as a serious game or a commercial game, that we can consider making it ourselves. And we can think about bringing a different ideology into it, or even having our students explore it and use it. Now, one of the projects we did was on Dio de los Muertos, and we used Second Life because it was easy for us to set up avatars in the space and give students a lot. But we basically gave them everything that we thought they would need to build Day of the Dead altars. And instead, what we found is that they did very different things with it. But they also did the research on what is considered authentic and what isn't considered authentic. And I know they turn out differently than ours would have if we had just made it for them. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to these games and game design, you as an educator can take a look at it, and if you don't see anything, you can consider what would you have the students do, because a lot of popular culture shows up in these games, and there isn't necessarily, and Assassin's Creed can be considered different, but there isn't necessarily a lot of thought that goes into them, especially if it's a game and it's been successful.
Mm-hmm. Right. And this also addresses another question that some people have, which is, and I don't know if we're thinking about this right now, but the issue is, if you assign students, let's say you have a class of 30 students, and you assign them one single topic with one single perspective to write that paper, you get 30 different papers, assuming they didn't plagiarize. You get 30 different papers. Now, why is that? Okay, part of it is not only even if we say to the student, we go, okay, let's do this experiment. I want you to try to interpret or try to incorporate this ideology and demonstrate it in the way you designed this game. Don't forget that every one of us have certain ideologies operating in our consciousness. We don't want to omit this, but we are constantly, okay, being called by ideology. Althusser would tell you that ideology is a process, right, or interpolation. It's a process by which ideology calls you. And once you respond to ideology, you become a subject to that ideology, meaning that now you're governed by the ideology. So ideology is surrounding us everywhere. If we accept, for example, just because we're talking about earlier about war on terror, if you accept the truth or the validity of this idea of the war on terror and also the idea of axis of evil, you basically have accepted or responded to the ideology. You are now subject to our ideology. And this is why some people die for ideology, because now they are subject to it. They are somewhat governed by it, and they want to promote it, or because it's tied to their identity as people. Our identity is also associated with the ideology that we are here to. Okay? All right. So I think, right, and I think what, yeah, design concepts, and Grid also say a little more there, which is certainly designing or incorporating concept make games more interesting. I would totally agree with that. I think one of the problems with the game industry and why indie games are on the rise is because the same old game is being sold to us. So it's always good, right?
Oh, we did it in an anthropology class, and we wanted students to go and look what the basic story was, and it was a decently sized class, about 30 students, and they had to pull one, and basically, yes, most everything that they were pulling was very much the fantasy medieval time kind of game. And
right.
they could pick whatever they wanted, but it ended up that that's what they picked, and so we were kind of surprised, and also wanted to think more about the games that we were signing.
And also, Grid touched up on the secret of how academic papers are written. Have you ever wondered, right, academic papers, even if it's the same topic, you get like 1 million papers. So that's because we're always thinking about different theories to interpret the same thing. So when I assign those articles, you should see that, for example, Bioshock, we already seen people writing about Ayn Rand's, individualism and using that to interpret what's going on in Bioshock. But then here we are having a wonderful article by Murtile talking about, okay, this is another way. This is another way to look at Bioshock, right? So there's always a different way to look at something. So you can think of concepts or theories as lenses, different glasses you put on to interpret or make meaning of something. And in that sense, going back to Foucault, because I like to thread everything for you guys together, Foucault said that's agency. You're giving yourself agency by making meaning. And this is what we're teaching students, at least in the humanities, of giving them agency to understand how to interpret something using certain framework. Okay, so great. Let's go next. Talked about a lot of stuff there. Okay, so on games and moral choices. So Schultzky also discusses. Okay, so he says the Fallout series, all the games, it's among the video games best suited for ethical instruction because it is set in an open world that grants the player freedom of action, including the freedom to be moral or immoral. Although these games have not perfected the moral dimension of play, they are effective in presenting players with complex moral dilemmas, so basically two morally things to do and you can only choose one, okay, moral dilemmas, that require careful reasoning. The games do not purport to teach morality, and they should not attempt to do so. Their value is in creating compelling simulations that force players to test their own values, then using sanctions in the game to respond to the player's choices. We should see them as a training ground in which players can practice thinking about morality. So in previous presentations as well, because a lot of the work I'm doing is similar on this line, which is it's a false understanding to say, let me just give you this video game to play because according to so-and-so, it's talking about this theory, so learn the theory from. That's not what we're saying. It's just a simulation of a condition. The game designers are not philosophers, okay? And everyone has their own specific, discipline, that they're teaching. So they're not there to be teachers. But certainly our role as teachers is to guide the students to look at how to interpret what's happening in the game, how to correlate what's happening in the game with the concept that we're teaching. And that's the whole point of why it's a good game for ethical instruction. Now, ethics and morality, okay, I'm going to be redundant here. I'm going to say it one more time. ethics is rules. It's a rule system that governs how we act. Okay, how we act. So when you say ethics of a society, like American ethics, that means here are some of the rules that you need to act in society. Now, some of those rules could be arbitrary. Some of those rules could be amoral, meaning it doesn't have to have moral value. It doesn't have to. It's just saying, for example, we have and anyone correct me. I still remember that we can't. Is it Colorado? One of the laws is that we can't ride horses on Sunday.
Oh, no, I was not aware of that one. I did not know we had a ban in this state on riding horses on Sunday.
Yeah, I don't know if that's banned yet, but you see, that's an example where, you know, the law system, or if you go into law, lawyers are basically studying the ethics system. For philosophy came out with ethics, and then later on it became ethics inform how we create laws. That's the connection between ethics and law, okay? But if you tell me, oh, every single ethical rule is a moral rule, that's a real mistake, because to say you shouldn't ride horses on Sunday, I mean, it could just mean because it affects someone's interest, okay? But that doesn't mean it's morality, okay? So, can ride camels? I don't know. I have to check on that. I don't know. I'm not, you know, I should check the law. I don't know. But I think we can go next. Okay. So I just took another screenshot there of the Fallout just to show you what the game really is about. So, a tiny quote here. The main character, ventures into the wasteland of post-nuclear America to find an array of enemies ranging from mutated ghouls to renegade factions of the U.S. Army, and must complete a series of open-ended quests that make game experiences personal. So, if you were the lucky ones, one of the lucky ones, so you went down the bunker that the propagandist told you, you need to go stay in the bunkers to protect yourself on nuclear fallout. So when you come out of it, you realize as a player that some people never went into the bunker. So some of them kind of look like ghouls because they got mutated by the radiation, right? But that's what you're fighting against, because what you are essentially fighting against is not monsters essentially, but other people who have different interests than you. So when you fight as a player, it's just ideology against ideology. That's essentially what it is. Okay? And he says here, one of the highlighted part is, must complete a series of open-ended quests, which open-ended means, you know, there's different ways to approach the quest. That makes the game experiences personal. So depending on how you approach the quest, right, it becomes personalized because it came out the way you want it to come out. So that's what he means by the open-ended. Okay, and next. Okay, so there's also moral weight to the choices you make in the game. So moral weight means the choices you make are not frivolous, okay? They actually do matter. So he says, what makes the game so enjoyable is that the choices matter. While players must complete the same main quest, they have so much choice over which side quests to complete and how to complete them that no player come away with the same experience as another one of the qualities that sets the Fallout series apart from other games is that the quests are not open, but that they also attach moral weight to the player's choices. Now remember, this is still an older game, and this article is written in 2009. You know, it's not, obviously now we have more games like the Walking Dead series, which is an interactive fiction. So more designers are now realizing, boy, to give players a sense of agency, whether it's an illusion or not, we kind of have to give them some options here. So this certainly, Fallout was one of the first ones to kind of do this, to make it so that the player feel like they have choices and that choices all matter because it's about their journey. Okay? So I think next. All right. So we just talked about moral problems inside the game, or moral issues, but this game also extends outside of itself. So that's why when I name these titles, I say games and ideology, or ethics and games, because I'm not saying ethics inside games or ethics of games. There are many different directions that you can look at how ideology operate outside and inside the game. So he says, Fallout 3 was initially banned on Australia because of the prominent role of drugs, only to be accepted in an altered form that fit within the country's game rating system. In the game, each drug is accompanied by a small graphical representation of the drug, and the player is shown using them when they are taken in the game. The drugs closely resemble real ones. Med-X was even called morphine before censors forced a change.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So so obviously, like what Kay was talking about, which is they pull from popular culture, drugs, and then they incorporate in the game. But certainly there are, although a game, this is where an example where the game affects real world policy now. They're saying, wait a second, you have a game here where you promote, you say it's okay to shoot it up because it gives you special powers, right? That's a problem for our children, so you need to change all of that. So certainly there are moral problems that the game tried to address, and also moral problems that the game is creating for other people who say, boy, I don't know if this game is moral in itself, not just the game content, okay? But he also, just to clarify though, Shulsky is kind of defending Fallout. He said that in the game, it does show you some negative side effects due to addiction. And other games sometimes don't do that. So in Bioshock, the consequence or the negative side effect is less. I mean, yeah, okay. I should clarify. You kind of lose your humanity slowly.
Oh yeah, and Bioshock just has this atmosphere to it that you just know that there's this overwhelming idea of things aren't right.
Yeah, right. It's off. I mean, there's monsters everywhere. The world's falling apart. Yeah. So there's that bigger consequence. But this game, there's actually real side effects to your body that you can visibly see. So Shulsky says, well, this makes the game actually a moral. Make you question on morality in that sense. Okay, so next. Okay, and one more. Also sexuality, yay! So you have drugs and now sexuality. He says, in Fallout 2, so the second one, the player could collect condoms called Jimmy hats and work in the post-apocalyptic American pornography industry. The scenes were never visually graphic, but they did bring real moral questions about sexuality into the game with uncompromising directness. So you know that's what's happening. I mean, they're not going to show you the scene, but you know that that's pornography, and obviously they throw out the word condoms, Jimmy hats. So it deals with a lot of things, right? But it forces you to think about the morality of that act as well. Next. Thank you. So now we talk about virtue ethics. Remember I said ethics doesn't have to do anything with virtue. So now I'm going to explain this player-centric virtue ethics. So he says, more than anything else, the Fallout series is unique in giving players an open world in which they can make genuine moral choices. Moral dilemmas are not presented for passive contemplation. They are an integral part of the gameplay. As Sicard, Miguel Sicard, he's also a famous game studies scholar. Okay, so Sicard points out in his study of virtue ethics in games in 2009, virtue ethics is player-centric. It makes sense only when players are not merely passive recipients of the game's content, but actually play a role in determining the course of events. So remember, ethics is rules, right, that dictate your actions, right? So the fact that you can actually, if it's player-centric and what you do actually matters, therefore there's that virtue ethics that he's connecting there. So he says, Fallout is certainly player-centric, and it includes a sophisticated system of quantifying players' action in order to work them into a computer simulation. So I'm going to quickly go to the next one to show you guys the connection. Okay, whoops. Spoke too soon. Philosophy idea, okay, utilitarianism and Fallout. So utilitarianism is made famous by Jeremy Bentham, and there's also another philosopher, but I'm just going to talk about Bentham here. Utilitarianism is the idea of achieving the maximum happiness for the greatest happiness for greatest number of people. That's utilitarianism. That in itself is the ends to our purpose. The reason why we live is to make ourselves happy for the greatest amount of people. Okay? And Jeremy Bentham measures happiness. So he has this formula. Measures happiness by assigning numerical value to the variables intensity, duration, certainty, propinquity, purity, fecundity, and extent. For time or quantity, this is easy since we already measure time and space numerically. Bentham also thinks we can assign numbers to the intensity of a pleasure and how certain one is of obtaining it. Now, with philosophy, again, there are different ideas you don't have to agree with, but it's certainly interesting to think that somehow morality can be measured by numbers. Okay, so next. Now, this is how Fallout 3 does it. So, Shulsky says, Fallout 3 attempts something similar to Bentham's quantification of pleasure and pain with the karma skill. Although Fallout does not start from the utilitarian assumption of happiness being the greatest goal, right? So the greatest happiness for greatest number of people. It does measure the amount of harm done to other characters in the game. There are 6 moral types corresponding to the numerical values between -1, -1,000 and -750. The player is very evil. -749 to -250 is evil. -249 to 249 is neutral, and 250 to 749 is good, and the last one is 750 to 1,000 is very good. So you can actually see your number correlating to your moral value. Okay, nearly everything the player does. Yeah, that game's weird.
No. I'm just thinking. I'm just thinking about all the quantification devices people are using. You know, these days, am I getting good sleep?
Oh.
Am I, am I getting the exercise that I should? I'm just thinking about a karma scale and some. Oh, I don't know, some wearable tech coming out soon.
What do you mean, Mike? Yes. I mean, next time you'll know you have a jogging, you know, the watch is telling you you're evil today for not jogging, you know.
Oh, yeah, well, come on. Some of them already tell you you're a couch potato and frown at you.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Now you're getting me to think about some really bad places that this can go.
Oh, I could definitely see. How many people did I say hello to today? How, you know.
Goodness. Yeah. So he just added everything you do in Fallout 3 affects karma. Increases or decreases the number depending on morality of actions. So in this, that's why he thinks, I mean, he said, this is a perfect test to teach morality. If you're a philosopher, you want to use this test to teach ethics. Because everything you do in this game have consequences, and it's measured by those numbers. And the number, not like most games, like if you play Candy Crush Saga, they give you points, and you go, yay for me. But they don't tell you that this point equals this. So, couch potato. Yeah. There's the value, ideology at work here, right? Next. I think, we have a little bit more. I'm almost done, okay? Fallout 3 and Moral Dilemma. So he says a little bit more on this example, just to show you how Moral Dilemma works in the game. So in the pit of Fallout 3 expansion, the player is faced with a moral decision that's far less clear than most others in the game. So moral dilemma in themselves are not clear because you know both options are morally right thing to do, so you don't know which one, right? The main quest, called Free Labor, revolves around the difficult choice between freeing slave and curing a degenerative disease by kidnapping a baby, or defending the baby and the scientists looking for a more humane cure to the disease while allowing the slaves to remain oppressed. The designers took care to present compelling reasons for each choice. So the next slide, I'm going to show you how they do this. Okay, and this is our last slide. So this is what he says there. The slaves clearly live miserable lives and aspire to something better, but they are also ready to hurt the innocent baby in pursuit of their cure and want to kill all of their former captors, not all of whom seem immoral. On the other hand, the slavers treat the baby well, and they have a strange paternalistic care for the slaves because their leader claims to defend them from the outside world. The masters are flawed because they keep slaves, and because the forced labor includes such unnecessarily harsh measures as forcing them to fight each other to the death. Thus, the player is forced to weigh two choices that will each produce a great deal of good and evil. So you see, there are conditions here. The writers are seriously trying to go, let me design a scenario, first scenario, and a second scenario, and know that if you, for example, free the slave, they're probably going to kill the baby.
Yeah.
Hurt everybody else. And the other direction is, well, you know, if you let them continue, even if the masters say, oh, they treat the slaves well, apparently it says that the forced labor condition make the slave become violent toward each other. So what to do? And again, what exactly is the right answer is hard to say. So if you are teaching students with this particular text, the literary text of Fallout 3, the student basically have to justify. If they make one option over the other, they have to use logic and reasoning to explain to us how they reach that conclusion. This is why this is a wonderful tool to teach ethics. Okay, and I'm just going to correlate because I want to bring it back to you guys because I've been talking for a long time. Can you think of places, because again, you guys are experts at WoW, I'm not. Is there parts in WoW where you feel like you can teach something of this effect, or maybe the ethics of something in the game?
There are, but there's not a lot. I wouldn't say there's a lot of them, but there are portions. There are portions of it. The biggest one that always gets me is the starting quest on the Horde side, where if you want things done, things aren't being done, and you're told to go and beat the peon, to get the lazy worker going. And I mean, it's something I won't do. And I know some other people that there's certain quests that they won't do. I wouldn't say that there's this. I wouldn't say that there's this concrete kind of example. I mean, I think that anybody going into something like World of Warcraft would be able to overlay moral choices. And the Rise of the Horde, the book we're reading right now, really has Doratan stuck in a position about whether to follow orders, and basically create it's a genocidal act that he'll be doing, or if he doesn't follow orders, then the leader of all the clans, the leader of the Horde, will wipe out his clan.
Mm-hmm. So there are some examples, but this
I wouldn't. Unless you were going in with a really big plan already, and you had an idea of how the students can play this. Then I wouldn't say World of Warcraft does it anywhere near as good as Fallout seems to.
Okay.
Right. I would like to add, I think that it's kind of implied, and as Kay said, you'd have to think it out ahead of time. Now, the recent expansion, it's interesting because this whole garrison thing, it to me, it's parallel to the Wild West. And you have these followers, and you deploy these followers to do things. It's a lot of decision making there because there's a chance. When you select the right one, there's a better chance of winning. But sometimes you just don't have the right one, and you want to give it a shot anyway. And it kind of, in my head, I'm thinking, this person is really not equipped to do this. I'm going to deploy them for this mission on just maybe. And of course, I can't help but keep the parallel of what we do in real life. Do we deploy unprepared 18-year-olds to go do something that they're unprepared for, and just kind of go, oh well, collateral damage, I'll try it next time. I mean, those are like I said, it's implied. I don't think it's very explicit like the examples you gave. But I think that the examples are there. You just kind of have to find them.
Right. This is kind of going back to what Grid was asking earlier, right? Is the designer doing this intentionally? When you have examples this clear, I mean, obviously they thought about how to set this up, because it's very intentional. And there are other examples where you're saying, for example, WoW, which you can obviously say, well, I don't think it's that intentional, but certainly as educators, if we understand those concepts, we can find them if we look for them.
Oh yeah, right? I think you can definitely go in. You could look at a situation and go in. And one of our economics instructors, Jim Vernon, what he did was he really wanted to look at the tragedy of the commons. And in economic terms, and you've heard the term too, that's where no one, this is a grazing area that everybody can use. But because of that, does that mean that other people overuse that? And he got real excited and had his class look at some of the areas where you do gathering, where people people will go in and purposely thwart. Other players will go in and purposely thwart you so that they can collect the things rather than you can collect the things, and it's not like everybody shares together. But at the same point in time, you have these examples where people go into a resource area, and anybody in World of Warcraft playing recently, this would be the frog area, and people specifically, players specifically group up to be able to share rather than compete against each other. So I think that you can look for this. We've seen it and done it with economics. I think you could find it with asking about questions like this. But Fallout 3, I think this one I think is wonderful.
Now, just to preface this though, it is really violent. It is really bloody. Not
of course it is. You've already told us that they're shooting up. Okay,
I know,
so
right?
no, I'm not. Well, first, and the thing of it is, as we always go back to, play the game. You know, if you're an educator, play the game, and you know, the students might not be able to make it to the point of this quest.
Right.
You know, without having to deal with everything else.
Right. Yeah, I just had to add that in there, just in case someone's like, oh, hey, let's assign this to adult
that's wonderful.
students.
No, I mean,
talk about condoms and earlier slides.
I mean, you can. I have to say, you could borrow this, this debate, clearly citing it, and as it coming out of Fallout 3, as a way to be a bit more engaging, say, perhaps with your students. But I think it's a well-written one, based on what I'm reading here, that would make for an interesting debate in a class.
Yes, and the last bit, just to add on more and more. I think it's when we talk about moral dilemma, I'm going back to this moral dilemmas. It's always good. I mean, it's easy. I mean, in the K-12 setting, when children, they're still learning how to think about what exactly is morality. Certainly, to teach them right from wrong, that's your preliminary step. But when your students are more sophisticated as they get into high school and also going into college, then you need to explain. I mean, essentially, the activity that you set up, if you're going to teach ethics or morality, you need to make sure they understand it's really not that clear. That's why it's very difficult. And also, we talked about there are different types of ethics, there are different types of morality. So when you apply a type to understand a situation, it's never, the real world is, the issues are not presented that clearly for you to say yes, one or the other. Most of the time we're put on a spot, and we know that whatever choice you make, there are consequences, and that's the bigger lesson that I think most of these kind of video games can really teach your students, which is thinking complexly, thinking with empathy, thinking, understanding of agency and interpretation. All those fall into play. And I think that's the end for me.
And on it, yeah. I mean, okay, Sherry, we were right to say, look, all games have an ideology, and part of when you're giving your students this, especially if you're teaching a subject like rhetoric, is getting the students to clearly identify the ideology. Would that be correct? Because in marketing, I will tell you, we did this, and I taught food marketing and agribusiness marketing. It was looking at what the newspaper article was, what the announcement was, whether it be the film, whether it be the news item, whose point of view is this coming from? And is there an agenda from this point of view? Who's going to be watching this, and who's going to be convinced by this? It was something that we discussed all the time.
Yeah, exactly, right? Perspective in itself, you can say it's ideology. An agenda is a goal that serves the ideology. We can't get out of it.
Yeah.
In like society, we can't get out of, all that. All the entire world, our mind works on ideas. You can't get away from it.
And whatever piece of media you're having students watch, whether it be a YouTube clip, or if you're doing a movie or a documentary or a book or a magazine, you're going to want your students to identify that right off the bat, anyway.
Right.
And I think that is really critical thinking skill.
Right.
Information literacy.
Yep. Exactly.
So, do we have any other comments from anybody who is watching or anything else?
I just want to add that, the idea of teaching ethics, I happen to manage the teaching of an ethics course for some of our upper management folks, and it's not really a course, it's more of like legal things, it's a compliance thing. So they go online, it's a self-paced, read what the laws are, take a test at the end, and of course my take on it, it doesn't really teach ethics, but the teaching of ethics through a game like this, you really are making decisions, and we talked about that class, and we all said it doesn't really teach ethics. I mean, the only way that we would be able to determine if the person learned something is if they were in a situation where they had to behave ethically, and an online read and do a multiple choice test doesn't do that, but a game could do that. So I mean, we do have to teach ethics, and people do have to behave in an ethical manner, and it's a tough one. So it just seems like games and simulations might be a really good way to do it with impact.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I think so. Because Tanya, you're right. I mean, part of it, if it wasn't a online video game, I would say, and this goes back to being very old school, it's scenarios. Is basically a face-to-face role playing, where it gets complicated for whoever it is, and again, it's going to be a role play simulation, but where they can answer the questions, make the decisions, they can get more information. I did this with my students when it came to commodity trading. They started, back, pre but we played commodity games where they sat there as commodity traders. They were given a certain amount. They were in teams, and they'd be given one thing and then the next thing, and then, oh, well, guess what? In Brazil, there's a drought in Brazil. You won't be able to buy from Brazil anymore. And we did that just so that they could get more of a sense of all the circumstances that could be affecting this. And I could see something like that possibly in your ethics class. That if there were certain scenarios, and again, this isn't something obviously that your administrators have the time to do, but think about it, in a group setting, one person or a team being continually given these things. And I mean, digital media and making it into a game would allow you to do it, distance, like the way that you're doing it now.
Right. The term for that in philosophy is called experimental philosophy, where we create hypothetical scenarios, which is what you're talking about, with the specific example you gave, which is great, to give students these conditions and make them see how they correlate. We say, if you have to abide by this moral or this ethical system, okay, and all the rules are in that ethical system, then how would you interpret this condition? You cannot be inconsistent in your decisions if you say, I abide by this ethical system. And we come up with all kinds of interesting responses, because students, some of them say, I really, really do not want to make this decision, but to be consistent and to the ideology, I have to make that choice. And that's an interesting insight as to how human beings think, because sometimes we really are, our hands are tied sometimes if we're not consciously figuring out how to resist it.
And Tanya, I think you might even be able to do this, make it better than multiple choice using a Google survey. The Google survey tool, with depending on which one they check on, like to get it to branch out. But it would be time consuming, but an interesting thought.
Mm-hmm.
Because because I would even have even be putting like 30-second moral dilemma clips that you and the rest of the people on staff with you would do, like a 30-second clip of some moral dilemma of something happening, or so a parent, I don't, whether it's a parent calling, whether it's this being delivered, or like a subpoena or a cease and desist, and have them respond that way. But that's just my thought.
Yeah, and a good one, and as you say, it just takes time, and but in any kind of a game, whether it's an online game or any kind of a game, will actually have people making those decisions, and
Yeah.
and that really is what it's about, is making the correct decision.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, with that, I think we are wrapping up in games and ideology. And Sherry, thank you so much. This was really great again.
Thank you, guys, and thank you for all the questions and comments, because it made it fun instead of dry. I mean, sometimes it can get dry. So thank you for that.